Okay, so Sensei Jason Gould here from Emerald Necklace Martial Arts, and today I have the pleasure of sitting here with Roy Miller. He is the author of Meditations on Violence. I can cover him up.
Mm-hmm.
And we're actually here sitting in the dojo. He has graced us with his presence, and we're looking forward to doing some training later this afternoon. But before we actually step on the training deck, I thought it would be great to spend just a couple minutes talking and letting my students know, or sharing with my students, some of the things that we're going to do today. So thank you for being here.
Cool. Thanks for being here. How are things in Justice League?
The Justice League is absolutely fantastic, and I owe you $1 for that. I appreciate that. So one of the things that we're going to be doing today is really talking about the differences between traditional martial arts and what actually happens in the real world. And having read your book and having obviously taught the martial arts for a while, I find myself as an instructor often getting caught in the box of what I call the white pajama world, which is not reality. And we have been talking a little bit off camera where as an instructor, I feel very comfortable teaching to the level of dealing with the unruly drunk at the bar, but not really comfortable in addressing with my students for the sort of higher end violence from that predator. So maybe you can talk to sort of the differences in how you address them.
It's kind of a false sport in a way. The skills, the techniques that I've seen in traditional karate are fine for dealing with really, really high-end violence. The thing that's missing for most people is being able to identify when it is high-end violence and how to justify it. Martial artists spend a lot of time studying, for want of a better word, they study solutions to the problem.
Right.
Okay, this is how I deal with an attack. They study the solutions. They never really look at how attacks actually happen. So it's like memorizing the answers on the flashcard, but you aren't able to pair them up with the problems those are answers to.
Sure, yeah.
And so if you spent 10, 15 years studying martial art, spend at least one day kind of studying the problem you're trying to solve. That's one of the biggest things you can do.
Yeah. And one of the other questions I had, as I go into my training is trying to deal with an attacker with the appropriate level of violence. So not in just sort of the get yourself out of jail aspect, but really assessing the threat and being able to respond with the right amount of force, or is there such a thing?
There is, and force law has to be taught, and it has to be taught along with your technique, because you have to train your judgment in tandem with your skills. If you don't, you will make mistakes. That said, to get the basics of force law takes about 2 hours. It's complicated, it's not that complicated. But what it actually boils down to is you're going to make a decision in a quarter of a second, and you're going to make it on partial information. If you're a good person, if you're a good ethical person, if you aren't, a ruthless evil bastard, the decision will be fine. If you have a survival instinct, you'll take care of yourself. If you have both of those things, you will make a good decision. The skill comes in explaining to a jury why that decision was the right one. And that skill, the articulation, is what takes practice and the thing that needs to be taught. You have to work it the other way. You have to teach force law so they know how to articulate it. But force law is a very complex heuristics, a very complex way of looking at what you're supposed to do. And when you actually do it, you will not have time to go through that. It's going to be very instinctive. Most people have good instincts. Most people do the right thing. They need to learn how to explain it with respect to what the law is.
So is that sort of, and I'll give you the quick plug, is that sort of what you're covering in the new book that you've got coming out?
The new book covers one of my little rants. There's 7 things. If you want to call it self-defense, there's 7 things you absolutely have to cover. Number 1 is legal and the ethical. Legal is what you're going to be held to, what you're going to be required to do. Ethical is everyone has issues with using force at some level or under some circumstances. If you don't know what those are until you're in the situation, you're going to freeze. You need to work those out in advance. Second is the violence dynamics. If you don't know how bad things happen, you don't know what you're defending against. Third is avoidance, de-escalation, and escape and evasion. And those are things like any other technique have to be practiced.
Sure.
You have to practice talking people down. You have to practice running away. You have to give your students permission to run away.
Right.
After that, you need to practice some simple techniques for counter-assault, for ambushes and sucker punches. Most of the things that are trained in a sport or dual-based martial art are too slow for that. And that golden move we were talking about, you need to design one specifically for ambushes and then train it to reflex. And there's a system to train things to reflex, operant conditioning. You need to practice it that way. After that, everyone freezes. You can pretend that you don't, but everyone freezes.
Sure.
Even extremely skilled operators, when you're doing the transition from searching or on patrol to shooting, that's a momentary mindset change. That's the shortest freeze you're going to get, but it is a slight freeze. But when you combine that with someone who's never experienced violence before, so they don't know, they think there are rules, or they think, they don't know what the rules are in the looking glass world, or someone that wants to figure out why this is happening, which is a very natural social thing to think about because you think the answer will be in the why. But when someone's stomping boots into your face, that's just a waste of time.
Not the time to think about why. Sure.
Right. So there are other freezes. There's the pure biological freezes. There are a bunch of different freezes, but in general, they feel sort of the same. You can learn to identify them, and you can learn to talk yourself out of them. It takes some time. You're going to take some damage during that, but if you don't talk yourself out of them, you'll never break out until it's over, until the person either destroys you or gets bored. If you survive the operant conditioning phase and the freeze, then you get the fight. And the fight is what all martial artists train at. And most stuff works pretty well there, with a couple of exceptions. You won't have the brain or the body that you're used to. You know what some of the adrenaline effects are when it hits you really hard.
Right. So, I try to tell my students that you take 50% off your best day, and that's...
Yeah. It's basically, you'll fight pretty much the way you're trained if you're clumsy, retarded, and deaf, which pretty much, and partially blind. That's essentially what adrenaline will do to you. So you have to train with respect for that. You have to, I prefer if people train for the respect that things happen in places. You get used to the smooth floors, the good lighting. So you need to learn how to use walls and found objects and the guy's own clothes and whatever else is in there against him. Anything in the world, if you use it first, it's a tool. The other guy uses it first, it's a hazard. It's just the way the world breaks. You learn to be the one to see the opportunity and use it first. And another thing that a lot of martial artists miss is that fights are incredibly dynamic. They move fast. When you're talking, you've got your shooting skills down, you work on the range. It's all nice, clean, and that has very little bearing to which is what you're going to
No one's shooting back, right?
Yeah, it's running, sucking for cover. If you poke your head up far enough to aim, that's long enough for it to get shut off.
Right.
And it's not that the stuff that you learn on the range is wrong. It's just incomplete. It's a tool that you then use to go into doing it dynamically and moving. Okay, same with martial arts. You practice your escapes from a bear hug. But the only people that ever hold you in a bear hug and hold you there are the police or bouncers. If a bad guy grabs a guy in a bear hug, it's to slam his head into the wall. And if he grabs the girl, it's to throw her in a trunk. So once you're whipped off your feet and your feet are in the air, how do your formal escapes work? You remember that they're dynamic. You start pushing, shoving, grabbing. And if you train with respect to that, then your martial arts will work. And the seventh is the aftermath. When it's all over, it's not over. There could be legal problems, psychological problems, or legal problems. And the better you've done preparing up to that point, the more accurately you've prepared, then the less those consequences will be. So that's what the next book's about.
Outstanding. Well, I look forward to that. Today is August 3rd, and Roy Miller's here in Boston. Really quickly, tell me a bit about what you're doing on Sunday.
Sunday, we're doing a seminar at the New England Muay Thai Institute, and we'll cover most of those 7 things I just talked about. It'll be for traditional martial artists, for cops, for people who are just interested in self-defense, or just interested in how bad guys work. And you'll get a chance to play a little bit.
Get there if you can. Sunday. Right. So, thank you very much for being here. And in a little bit, we're going to step on the floor. I look forward to that as well.
All right.
Thank you.